actually, they all knew each other in the same circle from university of the Unabomber. He knew some of these guys, and some of them actually talked about it later, some of his targets, that they had been given permission to try experimentation. And they were given Air Force hangars, big aircraft hangars, where they could go in and use them in experimental situations and invite lots of youngsters and give them certain drugs, and then start using the strobe lights when they were trying to wonder if they would introduce them into the discos eventually, which they did, of course. And how they studied them, how it threw people off balance, altered the brain waves that you had, the actual levels of brain patterns, and to be more suggestible. And of course it created a form of hypnosis as well. And it could make them, the people who were under the influence of it all, and maybe even drugs too, it would make them more compliant. You could actually do things with them without their knowledge. Then they would really not really know, so, or even have no memory of what really happened, especially if they had too much alcohol, or they give them drugs of certain kinds. These are all big behavioral experiments which they eventually put into mainstream disco dancing. And again, it would further reduce common sense, basically. That little bit of you that makes you apprehensive to go too far in any social situation. Alcohol does that by itself, of course. It breaks down the social barriers to an extent in social behavior, or it's like to call it inhibition. That which protects you is they now call inhibition, until you'll maybe do things that perhaps you shouldn't do. Massive behavioral experimentation went on. And then eventually, of course, into the 90s and 2000 onwards, you had the rave parties where even more precise psychoactive drugs were introduced and freely distributed, obviously, to the target groups. You would find psychologists and behaviorists eventually employed to attend these things, and they give them a higher balcony to watch down on, so they could study the effects of it all, to intensely study them for future use, because they might want to use it on the whole population eventually. You never know, because this is how things really happen and how they work. It doesn't happen by itself. It's not spontaneous and sporadic. It's all planned that way and heavily monitored and examined. We are the big test bed for all this stuff by those who claim that they own you. And the ones who do it on you, practice on you, are the ones they're the scientific elite who are employed by the dominant minority, like Aldous Huxley mentioned. It's all been done, And it's sad that most folk live through it, go through it all, and they don't even know it. What they've even been through, they think they've made their own decisions all along the way. Basic hypnosis, I've always said, wouldn't make you do something that you would normally not do, you see. That's always been the argument again with hypnosis, that it's a voluntary compliance. You decide to go under, and if you fight it, you won't go under the same way. And you can't be made to do something you wouldn't normally do. However, if you add strobe lighting into that, and the right kind of drugs, you've got a different story, on the go then. You're almost into the MK Ultra phase with psychic driving. And they used all these techniques with MK Ultra and lots more too, like with the strobe lighting, with the drugs, LSD, with electroconvulsive therapy, meaning they gave them shock treatment all the time, put so much current through their brains, hundreds of these episodes, until they literally depatterned the brain memory, until they had no memory at all, and it repatterned the memory. This is what they claim they did. And one or two of the survivors went through the experience, and one woman said, she's Canadian, she said that she can't even remember her previous existence before going into the clinic at all. When she was let out, she couldn't remember any of her, even her own children. And that was CIA. But we're constantly living through agendas. And when you see the size of the population of the world, if you have even, say, 100 million people in high-level positions of managing us all, It's not difficult to make anything happen, or to make anything perceived to be the way they tell you it is. It's all perception management, isn't it? And if they keep you running and being afraid and terrified all the time, most folks shut down, or they will not perceive what's in front of them and why things are happening. That's what terror is for, is to make you to comply and to be so afraid. They can change everything one step at a time, but very quickly, because you're stampeding, you see. You have no grounding in reality left in you. It's intentional. But the hype of the COVID thing, just the clips I've seen on the net that came from television, from mainstream news and so on, it's just over-the-top hype. The way that they're speaking is like actors or something, with using the voices they would use in a terror movie. Hype, 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 to exacerbate, comply is the message, really. If you want to live, comply, comply, and that's how it's done, isn't it? So everything's a big psychodrama. 9/11 was a psychodrama. You can argue forever what was behind it, but the fact is that what they saw on television was a psychodrama. Repetitive psychic driving. Here's the planes, buildings, boom, 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 over and over and over for days. Until I'm sure most folk were seeing it in their sleep. That was intentional psychic driving, they call it. MK Ultra type experience. Over and over, the same narrative, same narrative, same narrative, same narrative. You understand? I mentioned before how they did it with repatterning. They called it for MK Ultra. And Cameron, the guy who was appointed to oversee it, he also belonged to the CIA. The CIA has people in all countries, and they put him on the paycheck, and that's it. And Cameron, of course, and you couldn't get away with what he did without permission from the Canadian government too. They used a lot of the psychiatric hospitals across Britain and elsewhere for all these experiments, big experiments. So what he would do was bring in patients, of course, and, you're depressed, don't worry about it, we'll give you maybe 100, 200 ECT shocks and electroconvulsive therapy, LSD galore, and give you mass day and night music or instructions, vocal on tape, that you couldn't switch off. You couldn't move your hands up to pull a thing off your head or anything like that. And we'll eradicate all your previous memory and reprogram you. Repatterning, they called it. And use psychic driving, the repetition of the same things over and over. Same kind of thing you got with 9/11, with the same planes going to the tower, planes going to the tower, planes going to the tower, over and over, and you get for weeks and weeks and weeks. Psychic driving, that's what you do. And the same narratives, Osama bin Laden, Osama bin Laden, Osama bin Laden, the idea. Same thing, weapons of mass destruction, same kind of stuff, you see. And that's what we call psychic driving. Now it's COVID-19, COVID-19, COVID-19. And lockdown, obey is a big one, of course, for repatterning. And then you get doing dumb things, and how many folk can have on a Saturday compared to a Thursday or a Friday or a Monday in your home, and yada, 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 yada. And that's them just starting. Because you see, once you go off the rails of sanity and your Pavlovian trick, of obeying and then getting shocked again, and before you have a total breakdown, they have to, it gets easier to get you to do stupid things and crazy things. Easier and easier. Because you're getting off of common sense. Common sense is a very important thing that you take for granted. Have you seen what they do in the stores with the perspex? What do you think? I mean, the air goes round the side of the perspex, goes over the top of it, the little bit hole in the bottom for the hands go through for cash or credit card. It goes through. It's ridiculous. It's a physical symbol of something else. And the person behind it is wearing a mask. You're wearing a mask, and you've got a half-inch thick perspex thing between you, and you're saying, and they look puzzled, and then you're getting flustered. And then, of course, they pull their mask down and say something. Oh, yeah, okay. Or they go to the side, round the side of the perspex, it's about 6 inches further. And then they speak to you normal. Okay, yeah. It's all intended to create maximum frustration. That's its purpose. And as you get frustrated and angry, it's training you to quench your anger and deal with it and contain it. No, anger is a kind of natural response to absurd situations. Anger is a self-preservation mechanism. In the right circumstances, you're being trained to suppress it. So they increase it, then they train you to suppress it. Do you understand what's happening? Repatterning of behavior. That's all happening. Pavlov's dog. You know. Shock, shock, until you get a breakdown. Shock, shock, shock. You know. Be good, be a good little dog. Stand over there and get your dinner. Then you do it and do it, and then suddenly you get shocked one day, and you have a breakdown. You're doing the right thing. Isn't that what I was supposed to do? Was it, Master? Yeah. This is massive, massive psychological warfare. So here you have something so tiny. We don't even have the towers coming down with psychic driving, repetition, boom, boom, over and over, for days and days and days, the same things over and over and over, till everybody got the message and had nightmares about it. With the virus idea, you're just given you're given all the stuff from China, silent streets. You're seeing the horrific beatings of some people who've gone on the street without face masks on, things like that. But it's almost like a movie. It's like a disaster movie. The streets are empty in some places, just empty sometimes. A martial law scenario, basically. Everything comes to a stop. And that's, again, a form of driving it home. So the West had pictures of that repetition again from really the last couple of months now. And now they'll start implementing their strategies to deal with it here and elsewhere too. Now that you've had enough psychic driving, you see, and terror, to get through to even the simplest of us, the idea that there's something lethal stalking around and you can't fight it yourself. So the authority is going to action, just like 9/11. But these are the specialists, that will deal with it, etc., etc. And the message, of course, is be very, very afraid. And it says, it may be that so long as men are allowed to seek death, they will not mind having to seek it in a trivial cause. That's why folks speed in their cars, and so it's the only time they feel power, personal power, is through speeding and beating the guy in front and overtaking him and so on. And it says, they will not mind having to seek it in a trivial cause. To fall through the air before 1 million spectators may come to be thought a glorious death, even if it has no purpose but the amusement of a holiday crowd. Now just put that into car racing. They've done all the studies on it. People don't watch car racing to see the guy winning. They want to see the crashes. And that's why they show them with psychic driving, the technique that was used in race car driving. They eventually used for 9/11 towers, over and over, the same shots over. That's psychic driving to get it home, you see. Nothing you see on television, it happens by itself. And the way it's done too. The people are egocentric. We know that, in fact, from all the studies on muggings and rapes that have happened in broad daylight in some cities over the years, where even people standing at bus stops can see something happening and no one goes to stop it. Mind you, part of that conditioning too is because they're terrified that the police will arrest them should they injure the nasty character.
This is intentional too, to break up natural responses of helping each other, protecting each other. And we saw this very, very well. It was depicted well by the media as they kept showing us over and over. They love this repetition of over and over of emotive pictures with the hurricane that went through, or tornado that went through New Orleans. People sitting on rooftops, slipping into the water while those next door were not allowed to go and help them by FEMA. And this is intentional. And the viewers were put under a spell too, because they kept showing you helicopters flying over and over and not even dropping anything which was needed to the people. It gives a feeling of helplessness, inevitability. It breaks a form of bond between the natural response, which is really the survival of everyone, and puts you in a category where you're all victims, including the watchers. This is psychological warfare, repeated over and over. They first tried these techniques with racing cars, and once in a while the news will still bring one up where you see a spectacular crash, which is part of the reason they all go. And they'll show you that same crash over and over and over and over ad nauseum. The same technique was well rehearsed, obviously, because every television station on the planet went into drive right away. Overdrive, in fact, with the Twin Towers, as we saw, or as appeared to see, planes going in, the same plane going in over and over and over for days. That's psychic driving, psychic trauma, which was intentional. Because to get a war going that you've planned for years, you've got to make the igniting incident overwhelm the viewers, get them emotionally involved. Psychological warfare, well understood in higher military quarters and specialized departments. But the breaking of the individual from the individual was always the goal of totalitarian governments and systems. The real system is above the government. The government's only part of the system.
So you could look at all these things that are happening today if they want to push it and push it and push it. And they're testing with the latest gear, constantly testing us all in real time, as I've said before, as they float the ideas from Bill Gates and etc. And within 10 minutes, with the chit-chat on the net and the cell phones, they know exactly how far to push something or draw back a little bit on any particular point or topic. Because they put out trial balloons all the time, you see. That's how perfectly things are managed today. We understand that. But if you notice, at the moment, they're getting you trained that there's no input from the general public at all. You don't count. I hope you understand this, because you're living through precedents. Think things that never happened in World War I or World War II, or the entire Cold War, when you're supposed to all get blown to bits with atomic weaponry. None of this happened. And half the planet is locked down under martial law now. Never happened before. Never, ever happened. In some countries, you had curfews at night, the totalitarian countries. But here you have people locked down permanently, forbidden to work. You better start thinking about these things and how you're accepting it so easily. You see, the psychic driving of repetition.
Hi folks, I am Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix.
Kinsey was put up there again as a superstar. And he wasn't the first one to be put up, because in pre-Nazi Germany, during the Roaring Twenties, there was a German put up in front there to do the same thing, to bring sex to the fore. Even had a museum of sexual perversions, this particular guy, to try and standardize all of this as being normal for everyone, and to make people think, if you're not into this, there's something wrong with you. Well, eventually, they were all kicked out of Germany, and a lot of them went to the US, in fact. Then they came up with Kinsey, the same darn thing, in the United States, well-financed by the big foundations, the Rockefellers and the rest of them. And his job was to make everyone on the planet, especially women, think that if they weren't going around with 1,000 guys per year doing all kinds of weird and odd things, there must be something wrong with them. The idea being to destroy, once again, the family unit and tradition. Tradition had to be completely destroyed to bring in the new, according to the master builders at the top. And they did this very well with unlimited financing and with unlimited media attention, constantly spouting this nonsense. And it isn't until years later, once they changed all the system, and remembering his books were used in courts of law, judges would refer to his books in special cases and use that as a ground of law. We find out later it was all bogus. He hired prostitutes to do all these studies on anything but the average individual. They're now making CBC movies with taxpayers' money on the man, Morgenthaler, who started the abortion industry in Canada. He's now a hero. Just like Kinsey was elevated to be a hero, a man with incredible sexual perversions himself.
He also murdered his son.
He murdered, yeah.
And brags about it. It's, oh, he murdered his son. How beautiful. He starved him to death in a torture chamber. Oh, my God, it's so good.
And Kinsey himself, who literally changed the sexual morality of men and women because people read these books and thought, well, geez, if these are normal men and women, I'm missing out somewhere. I'm not so promiscuous. And so it was to guide the society into hyper-promiscuity, which again they knew would help destroy family units. You wouldn't need family units. They would die. Kinsey, as I say, kicked off this for the West. Now, he wasn't the first one. That was the 1940s. There was one in Germany prior to World War II in the 20s and 30s who had a museum built up it was called the Museum of Sexual Perversion, and had all the gadgets and gizmos and stuff to torture and everything, sadomasochistic stuff. And they really pushed Germany prior to World War II into all this stuff. You could walk into Berlin, they did the biggest nude shows in the world. People were broke, had no problem getting the females to go up and dance and all the rest of it, and even had orgies at the end of them. You see a trio of CBC documentary specials called Sin Cities. Sin Cities. Well worth seeing. You've got to see them. If you can find copies, send me them. And appreciate them. I saw it when it came out. But anyway, Kinsey simply copied his stuff because that guy fled Germany in the 30s. Kinsey copied his stuff because this is the same agenda by the same groups. And Kinsey was so weird and deviant, he was trying to get his staff even to have sex with each other. And he himself came to the conclusion he preferred men during his own studies. He went so far as to cut his own foreskin off. I don't know if you know that. Kinsey cut his own foreskin off with a penknife without anesthetic. I guess it gave him the biggest thrill he'd ever had. Maybe that's how far you have to go when you've done it all, seen it all. There's a good documentary on Google on Kinsey. It's called Kinsey's Pedophiles. Look it up. Very well done. Talks to the guys who work with them, and who still defend them, by the way, who are obviously all a bit that way themselves. Absolutely obsessed with their own particular little areas of speciality, you might say. Well worth seeing. But this is what this is intended to do. It's just picking up from there to go into this next phase. They call it intergenerational sex. They won't call it pedophilia. Intergenerational sex. That's the drive now across the world.
Everybody today is a product in your social behavior, your likes, your dislikes, your attitudes and your opinions. You're each a product of your total conditioning. And most folk are unaware of it naturally. They're like the people in the movie Brave New World. They laugh at what they think are crazy, silly ideas. They can't comprehend a different style than utter promiscuity and not bearing children yourself. Anything can be taught to people with enough indoctrination. UNESCO knows that. And of course, I've talked before about Julian Huxley, one of the guys who was the CEO of UNESCO, who went through a good part of the plan openly. And he wanted to raise children according to a good conditioning system for social, international, or world citizenship status. So that's all been done today. Now you go back to the Communist Manifesto and all the other writings churned out by the mob, and you'll find that they also talked about the total overthrow of all society and all existing institutions. That meant everything. That meant the entire culture, what you thought was right and wrong, are now out the window. And in came moral relativity, because you see, people with strong morals, it doesn't matter what they are, if they're all in it together and they believe in it themselves, they don't like it being changed. That's your customary taboos in the tribe. Once you're in the flow of moral relativity, then anything goes. But believe you me, anything doesn't go. It's what's planned to go that goes. You see? So the family unit was a big, big part of that, of course, and intersexual relations, and they want, even the whole idea, the taboos of sex with children and adults was up for grabs. And of course, Kinsey, the pervert himself, that was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Guggenheim Institution, another foundation, and the Ford Foundation, he came out with his totally scandalous book. Scandalous because it was not a work of any science whatsoever. It was an agenda where he tried to, well, he did, it worked. He fooled the whole world because he had such big money backing him into, he's what really goes on in bed. And he used people as the average American male. Most of the people he worked with were all perverts. He worked in the prison. He took the prisoners, convicted perverts, as average Americans. The women that he used in the interviews were mainly prostitutes. He encouraged his own staff, and I mentioned the video that's up on Google about a year ago. Very well done expose, well documented, that he used pedophiles for the studies. And he told his own staff to try everything, homosexuality, lesbianism, the whole lot, no holds barred, because you see, everything that man does is therefore normal. Moral relativity. And yet, after that was done, he was flown across the whole of the U.S., courtesy again of the Rockefellers, who had to destroy all that was to bring in the new, which is their domain, of course, their kingdom. And every judge in the land, I think it was 600 odd laws or more, affected in the U.S. alone to do with rape, rights of the child, not getting raped or touched or molested by adults, and all of that kind of stuff. Now, it doesn't matter that the lies are later exposed. This is how these guys